Hello, hello, my fellow sensitive people. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to be giving some remotes tonight. I have a lot to go through because this is about 2-3 days worth of remotes. I wanted to start a little bit with Joe Biden. I just want to be really careful when I do a meditation on him because it is somebody's reputation. Full disclosure, I did vote for Biden in the primary. After I saw that Elizabeth Warren probably wasn't going to win, I decided to go with Biden. But anyway, that's my own personal decision. And I will be voting for Biden again. But the question came up as best as, now I understand that part of how this works is that it could be, if you're a youngin', part of it's pretend, part of it's going through the rabbit hole. I'm okay with that. It is a empathy building exercise. And sometimes if we're lucky, we go through that rabbit hole and we bring back a gem that we like to call remote viewing. But sometimes we also want people to know it can just be imagination, and that's why this is entertainment. But when I went into the remote, when I went into the energy on Joe Biden, the feeling I had as Joe Biden, particularly as a young Joe Biden, is that I liked women. I didn't hate women. I didn't feel that I was on a power trip. Quite the opposite. I felt that I was a very handsome young man. Women were attracted to me. I was attracted to women. I saw myself as a great lover of women. I like women. Which brings us to the issue of, why men have affairs, or why men have little dalliances or little flirtations. That's a whole other conversation, but I did not get the feeling when I went into this energy that this person consciously thought that they were hurting anybody. This is somebody who I think it felt like he was looking to have a little fun and maybe somebody who could be a little discreet from time to time, and maybe made an awkward pass at somebody who he thought was wanted to also, in his words, in the remote, have a little fun and be discreet. So these little dalliances, when I went into Jill Biden about it, much to my surprise, I didn't seem to really care that Joe was off with his silly flirtations or whatever, because this is a very solid relationship and this is a very solid marriage. So it's almost as if in Biden's mind, at least how I perceived of it in the remote, was that there's a difference between having a little fun with somebody who's discreet and then nothing, that person isn't going to fall in love with you. They're not going to hang it over your head. They're not going to make problems. It's just two people having fun. That was Biden's perception. So I did some digging, and I know that the person that made these claims against her, the reason why I don't think the press has made much of it is because, number one, I think she took money, and number two, she's obviously being used as a conservative asset. So I think for those reasons, and rightly so, the general press has held the story. But I think there are going to be more allegations. But from my perspective, sitting in Biden's shoes, and as somebody who will be voting for him in November, nobody's perfect. This is not a rape energy. This is the guy that has a fun little affair with you in the weekend. Everybody knows that he's a little naughty, and then he feeds you ice cream in bed, and then you play like children and you have a fun little love affair, and then you see him a year later and you give each other a wink. That's what Joe Biden meant from it, as I saw it in the remote. That's not the same type of accusation as what you would get from, say, Donald Trump's accusers, etc. All right, so I think more cases are going to come out, and as more cases come out, I think we're going to have to decide. It's going to potentially hurt Biden's campaign, and at that point, we either have to decide: are we going to still root for him when the evidence is irrefutable that there's been affairs, etc., and possibly misunderstandings, or what do we do at that point? So it's a good idea energetically to prepare ourselves if that's what's floating around in the ethers, it's a good idea for us to just say, oh, okay, this story is probably going to grow. There are something like 5 accusers. So let's just be mindful of that and see how it plays itself out and how the DNC addresses it, because eventually it's going to become a public conversation. Okay, so the other thing that I did, which was kind of interesting, is I went into a remote while I was having a chat with my friend Mark Rhodes. And I think it's cool with Mark if I tell this story, but we were having a bit of a chat and we were playing with the cards. And I found myself entering into a very deep remote state. And I don't usually do that when I'm usually pretty awake when I'm doing a reading or talking to friends. So it was really cool to have Mark there when I go into that semi-trance state. The only other time that somebody has witnessed me go into a trance state was Michael in Australia. So that was kind of cool to have my friend on the phone and then feel myself slipping into that state. But in that state, what we saw, we talked about it, Mark and I, was Barr was potentially or possibly already had filed a complaint about the current administration. So we could see William Barr filing a formal complaint against the Trump administration. And what we found was that Barr was beginning to feel as if he was being manipulated, and that by this administration, and some of those manipulations were beginning to cross the line in terms of pressure by Trump on Barr. So it appears when we went further into the energy that Barr was responding to some kind of summons or review of his handling of certain investigations. So it appears somehow, some way that Barr is under some type of investigation and has to explain for some questionable actions. And from that conversation emerged Barr's response that he feels that he has been manipulated by this administration. And because he feels manipulated and because he doesn't want to cross the line or do something, he's on the verge of potentially losing everything he spent his whole life working for in his mind, right? We're in his mind. And so for that reason, I think he's going to either has or will file a formal complaint against this administration. This is the big news. And we also know that he handed the entire Mueller report over to the judge who requested it. And will probably, if we're right about this, be reopening and handing over more information as this progresses. There seems to have been some split that's happened between him and the president. I know that he spoke with the president in a press conference and he didn't make eye contact. He kept looking down even when he was addressing the president. So I thought that that was kind of interesting. The other thing that came up is a feeling like there's going to be some kind of a crash, some kind of major crash is coming in the next couple of days, either tomorrow, the next couple of days. There's some major global shakeup. We had trouble seeing what that was, if we're going to see another crash in the stock market, or what that's going to be. Other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was the meat packers and the people who are working in the meat industry. I got a very nice message from somebody who was a hog farmer and was a humane hog farmer, loved his animals. This was more somebody who felt like when I did my remote, somebody who was working for a large conglomerate and didn't have the ability to have that kind of relationship with the hogs that he remembered from childhood. And it had come up, the subject in the remote, that there was quiet investigation into whether or not this coronavirus could be passed on to animals, and at which point it would be contaminating the meat supply. So I went and looked at the FDA and looked at everybody else's articles, and it's a circular argument. They keep saying, well, that's a different type of coronavirus. Yes, it is, but you're not answering the question. Is there any data at all? And the answer is no, we have no data, but we do know that hogs can get H1N1 and they got H1N5, the SARS, the birds got H1N5. And so there is significant enough evidence that people who are working around these animals need to protect themselves. You see where I'm going with this? So that means that if the FDA is deliberately not sharing that information, that there's no data, and so we must assume that it is a risk until we have the data, because we know previously what coronaviruses have done. The fact that we have no data at all, we should assume there's a risk. So I think it was a couple women died that were working in a meat plant. I think it was in Kansas, is that correct? And then two people died at a meat processing plant in another state. I don't know if it was Iowa or wherever it was, and now they've had to shut the entire plant down with at least 50 people showing symptoms, thousands out of work. So I just think it goes back to the energy that we're going to see a connection between not only the close quarters that people working in these meatpacking plants are undergoing, but potential risk between animals and humans. And I just want to say that it's kind of scary if you've read The Jungle and other books about the rise of unions and democratic socialism in the United States that happened during the Industrial Revolution. It's as if we've returned back to that because we've removed so many protections for workers, whether it's adequate pay, but also OSHA, adequate protection for people who are at risk, or burying and deliberately giving you a word salad answer about whether or not people who are working in hog farms, the poor and the people that need to work, who are being called essential workers and barely getting by, could be potentially putting themselves at risk. So if they're deliberately suppressing that information, or not admitting that we don't have enough data, that's pretty morally bankrupt and may lead to lawsuits in the future. All right, so then the last thing I did, there's two more things I did. Okay, the next thing I did in the meditation, this was last night's meditation. That was the first night. Today, this is last night's meditation. I just meditated on Gaia and trying to understand the virus and trying to step back and see the virus more from a global perspective, just in terms of environmental science and how the planet shifts and creates and destroys new ecosystems. It destroys old ecosystems, builds new ecosystems, the incredible complexity of biodiversity. And one of the things that was really cool was I came to realize that shamanism and the ancient earth religions, Wicca, some of these ancient matriarchal religions, matriarchal beliefs that we see all over the world, have no conflict with science. And they have no conflict with environmental science. Like everything we're learning in the sciences, it's as if those observations were made by more quote unquote primitive persons. So an example would be a virus. They couldn't see the virus, right? It was invisible. They didn't know what it was, but they knew there was something silently that was killing people. The angel of death. And so they had some awareness that there was a spiritual correlation or something going on in the world that was causing this invisible thing to take human lives. And so that was seen as an angel. And in a way, a virus is kind of like an angel in the sense that it's sending a message, it's doing something very specific, and it's invisible, you can't see it. And so angel was simply a force that you couldn't see. And in the case of COVID, it's like that. It's an actual force in the world, but we can't see it. And I also noticed that if you look at the ancient ceramics, right, we have time for leisure, right? As we have more effective ways of getting food, we have more time for leisure if you meditate on evolution and art. And some of the first figurines that you see all over the world are the pregnant woman. It's the mother. It's the mother. As soon as we could speak as artists, this is right before the centralization of the church telling artists what they could and couldn't do. These artists were free to do whatever they wanted. And they all created the same thing, which was this image of the pregnant mother, as if they were communicating this understanding that the world was like a pregnant mother, right? And the mother comes first. So when you go back and you look at that energy and you try and see it objectively, here is what I heard the universe or the world say to me. It said, here is why this has happened. In the greater scheme of things, there are more important things than the life of a single human being, or even many human beings. How can I say such a thing? Because you should not presume that your work here is of any greater value than anything else. Your work is no more important than an earthworm or a caterpillar. They too have their role to play. So in plainer words, what this energy was saying is that this is a diverse ecosystem that's ever changing, and the grander scheme is to maintain a healthy ecosystem. So it's like me being a cell on your skin, and I have no understanding of what it is to be a cell on my own skin, right? But when I take a shower in the morning because it's time to slough off the old, I have no emotional attachment to it. In fact, I might actually even feel better because I've had a nice shower, etc. So what she's saying in this meditation is she's saying, you're like that cell. You're not the most important thing, but you're important. And we rely on lots of various different forms of life in order to maintain this ecosystem. And so there's kind of a humility in this belief system, this idea of egalitarianism in the shamanic path. You speak about the destruction of a single virus. Yes, it is like an angel in a way, because ancient people could not see it, but they knew that it was there. Your ancestors were smarter than you realize. They understood that something unseen was killing them. This generation will ask the same questions. Because in the grand scheme of things, it is what is best for the planet. And then the second part of the meditation, as I went really deep into this idea of trying to not take it personally, right? Not take it personally. Why do I take it personally? I sat in an energy that felt like guilt, like shame, like an ancient shame from when I was a small child. And the answer I got back was, you must forgive yourself for having once been powerless in your life. So there's kind of this resistance I have, and I think part of this is also being an American, rugged individualism. I struggle with this idea that things happened to me in my life that I had no power over. I need to believe that even as a small child, I had some power, even if it's a complete delusion. And so what I'm hearing in the meditation is to hold on to that delusion is actually crippling you spiritually. Forgive yourself for having been powerless. To admit you are powerless is the hardest thing for a human being to admit to. But the truth is, it holds you back from humility and from asking for help and for asking for forgiveness. It also blocks us for forgiving others. This is not the same as saying people have an excuse if someone does something horrible, but it's about making peace with our own powerlessness. So I thought that was really, really cool. The last part of the meditation was trying to put myself in the shoes of Trump's base and people who had voted for Trump, people who were strong advocates, just love Trump, that are in remote areas. And it always feels the same way, that these are people that felt like they were finally being seen, that it was as if the circus came to town. In this meditation, this particular energy calls himself the Hillbilly Justice. He says, Hillbilly Justice. He said, this president will be introduced to Hillbilly Justice. He said, the way we fell in love with this president was like falling in love with a beautiful woman and then finding out that she has cheated on you. He said, the rage that we will see against his base in the coming weeks. He said, and then he kind of joked about old-fashioned ways that they will start referring to Trump. Trump is a scarlet woman, a sweet talker, a false prophet, a circus barker, And then the feeling, he said, is that we are going to start feeling very betrayed. And that is how he ended it. He said, you'll get to see what hillbilly justice looks like. And that kind of made me nervous, to be honest with you. So that was the wild ride of the last few days of remote viewings. I hope you liked watching them. They come from my weird creative mind, and sometimes they give us some interesting insights. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. If you're still trying to get in for a reading, you can look at the information below. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.